Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from the Quatella Center for Plastic Surgery and the Hugs Foundation. Founded by Dr. Quatella in 2003, Hugs provides reconstructive surgery to children with congenital facial deformities around the world. More at helpusgivesmiles.org.
For WXXI, this is Connections, filling in for Evan Dawson. I am Gino Fanelli. Today's connection with me between June 19th, 2025 and 2026. During that 365-day span, 139 people were shot in the city of Rochester. While 139 is still a lot of shootings, that figure is the lowest it's been since 2011 and marks a precipitous drop since the pandemic-era peak. The hike came between March 14th, 2021 and 2022, when 428 people were shot in the city. As of today, 5 homicides have occurred in the city so far this year. One of them was by shooting. Joining me to talk about what has changed in the past few years, I'm joined by Pastor Willie Lightfoot, founder of the ROC Against Gun Violence Coalition. Willie, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And Rochester Police Captain Greg Bello. Thanks for being here, Greg.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me, Gino.
So I kind of want to start with, first, I just want to say something. We're talking about crime trends as kind of a bigger picture of what's happening here. And I think this is not to say that there is not violent crime that happens in the city, that there is not shootings that happen in the city. As I just mentioned, there was 139 in the past year. But it is to say that even if you do see these kind of events happening that are scary, that can give an impression of a lack of safety and that should be taken seriously, that doesn't mean that the overarching view is that we are heading in a direction where violent crime is trending downwards. And that's the point to say that there is a difference between the perception of what is happening in the community and the data-supported numbers of the best data that we have to show what is happening in a larger scale and what has been trending over the past couple of years. So I want to talk about that trend right now. We are trending downward in violent crime in the city. Shootings are down, homicides are down. And this is a trend that we saw nationwide during the pandemic. All across the country, violent crime spiked during the pandemic era, and it's been trending back down in the years since then. In Rochester, we saw a very dramatic version of this. Shootings were extremely high during the first couple years of the pandemic. And as time has gone on, they're now at a point that's the lowest it's been in 15 years. So I want to get a sense from both of you of what changed during that time period. There is kind of this natural occurrence of the pandemic happening, and then there has to be more than that is contributing to that. So, Greg, I'll start with you of what the police department has been doing differently and how that might be playing into this.
Sure. So a few different things, and I appreciate that, because violent crime is not gone, right? It is down significantly, and we can sit here and celebrate the wins, but we're not there, right? Like, there's a long ways to go. We still have, put it in perspective, we still have 49 people that have been shot so far this year in the city of Rochester, but that at the same time that compares to 178 at this time of year back in 2021. So we're down, we're less than a third of where we were at just a couple of years ago, or 5 years ago. So we're on a great trend, and a lot of that comes down to evidence-based policing, and a lot of that comes down to our community interactions and our building our trust back with the community. Because if you recall, during the pandemic time, it was also at the time of very anti-police movements going on across the country, and a lot of police community relation strains, for lack of better terms. Yeah. And here in City of Rochester, we've done a ton to rebuild those community relations. Mm-hmm. Whether that be, we're coming up on year 3 of, I believe we're the only police department in the nation that hosts an HBCU Fall Classic.
Yes.
Thinking outside the box and building those bonds and community bonds. We've got a ton of programs.
Shout out to Commander Stitt.
Oh yeah, Keith Stitt was the best. Yeah. Unfortunately he left us to go back to Jersey, but he took he went home where his family is, mm-hmm. and that was great for him. But we've one of the only police agencies. We partner with the Urban League. We still have used space inside the Urban League at times for meetings, and we've really rebuilt a lot of that community trust and continue to rebuild that community trust. So that's number one. And then number 2 is evidence-based policing. It's really going after, whether through GIVE, through our partnerships with whether it be ATF and other federal partners, the Sheriff's Office and local towns and state police. We've really just increased the precision of our policing. Instead of casting wide drag nets, going after those are propensity for guns, going after the shooters, and then at the same time, going and taking care of the neighborhoods, whether it be our uplift programs that we have going on, where we're really focusing on specific street segments and broken this down to real small, whether it just be a block of a street, and not just dragnetting every criminal activity that occurs there, but bringing that neighborhood up, going out walking beats, whether it be our Cooper patrols, whether that be just regular walking beats, and going out and doing what we can to increase everything about that street segment. Working to uplift instead of down with criminals and hitting both facets of it.
Can you talk a little bit more about those patrols? I know they're very targeted to an area, and so what makes you look at a certain area and saying we need to be doing this, and how does it actually play out?
Yeah, so Cobra Patrols, it's from Dr. Coper. There's huge studies back behind it that he did. But essentially what we have is we've got the city broken down beyond our car beats. It's broken down to, I want to say, around 13 or 14,000 street segments. And so again, even in the past, looking at heat maps, we'd say, okay, this neighborhood, we need to work on XYZ neighborhood. No, now we're saying, okay, Willie, I'll speak familiar with Jefferson Avenue. Instead of saying Jefferson Avenue in total, okay, the 400 block of Jefferson Avenue, right? This 100-yard stretch, this 50-yard stretch, and focusing. Okay, so now if this 100-yard stretch, especially on afternoons or early evenings, and you can look at all the different stats on Wednesdays or Thursdays or whatever. Now focusing and saying, okay, well, we're going to walk that time. Our officers are going to get out of the car and they're going to walk 15 minutes or 30 minutes. That 400 block of Jefferson Avenue, not just Jefferson Avenue in general, and put resources out there, going out, stopping into the corner stores, stopping into the libraries, the rec centers, and going out and being that visible presence, even if that's just parking your police car there while doing your report writing. Because a visible police presence, generally, not always, you're not going to go shooting somebody when there's a police officer right there. You're not going to go shoot somebody when the police car is sitting there. And so really being smart, focused, and targeted on our proactive relationship building and our proactive visibility, our high visibility. So all of our officers are required to do all of our patrol officers required to get out, do Cobra patrols every day. And then what you're also doing, if we say, and I'm not speaking the 400 block of Jefferson Avenue, I just picked a random spot.
No,
but if an officer's out walking all the time in that 400 block of Jefferson Avenue, the officer that works at Carbeat, guess who everybody knows? The officer knows everybody in that area, and everybody in that area knows the officer, and getting back to that kind of community policing aspect of things as well that builds those trusts and build those relationships.
Well, you started the ROC Against Gun Violence Coalition in 2018?
Yes, right after, as soon as I got on city council.
Yeah, and I want to get a sense from you of, at that point in time, what was kind of your biggest concern then? And then we went through this, 2 years later, this massive spike of violent crime. I think that a big part of it is you have to, bridge a lot of gaps. You have to connect a lot of people that are involved or have different stakes in the community or know about what are some of the causes of the violence to begin with. You have to get everyone to kind of work together and have this really difficult conversation to address the issue. So I want to get a sense of when you started then, what the goal was, how you were doing it, and how that's kind of evolved over the years.
Thank you for the question. But before we go to that, I want to piggyback off of the first question of what do we think has changed over the years. And of course, from my point of view, from being a person of faith and a pastor, I truly believe in the power of prayer. And I believe that the effectual fervent prayers of the righteous availeth much. And I will tell you that people have been praying earnestly for our law enforcement, all of our National Day of Prayer. I think of Bishop Singleton and various others who just pray around the clock for our city and for safety in our city. So I truly don't want to be remiss if I didn't say, that I truly think acts of God are also with us and here in Rochester, because those 100-something shootings could have been 100-something homicides, but they were not. And that's only through the grace of God. And then, I would say that the mayors that we've had in the past, I have the pleasure of working with all of them. And I can tell you this personally into this community, that every single mayor that we've had over the last couple of decades, whether it was Mayor Duffy, whether it was William Johnson Jr., or whether it was Lovely Warren and this current mayor, Malik Evans, that I've worked very, very closely with, they all were concerned about public safety and eradicating violence and gun violence within this city. And they've done things to help to do that. And I can tell you from the perspective of, and I agree with the captain in regards to the way we've changed how policing is being done. I personally can see the change in community policing, being on Jefferson as just one of the examples. Being a business owner there, I see the presence of the police more than I've ever seen in the past. I can tell you that the partnerships that the captain mentioned, and I'll transition from those partnerships into your second question of the ROC Against Gun Violence Coalition, because that's what it was all about, was partnerships, is something that is unique in Rochester. And as me being a part of the Clergy for Safe Cities, so these are pastors that are dealing with gun violence all across the country. We have something very unique in this city that they don't have in other cities, which is a collaborative tables where people work collectively to eradicate and educate and advocate around gun violence within our community. So that is very powerful, and we ought to be proud of ourselves as Rochesterians to be able to do away with these silos and realize that life safety is more important than egos and pride and all of these other things in politics, for that matter. And so for me, wearing the hat of city council, I also have to say that I want to tip my hats to the council and administration, because we changed how we do business in council. City Rochester and government typically didn't do human services. I served on county legislature. I served on city council. When I was on the county legislature, I was on the public safety. I was on the human service committee. Rochester didn't do human service. We didn't do that type of work. The city council in the last 8 years have changed drives to the Department of Human Service and Recreation. So we're doing human service work now. We're doing non-police violent responses now that we weren't doing before. Nonviolent police responses. We have beefed up the crisis intervention teams. We've beefed up all of these various programming we now have the ROC Against Gun Violence Coalition, which we did not have before, started in 2018. I literally felt when I came into city council that my job, coming from public safety, 20-something years on the Rochester Fire Department, going to these calls of these shootings, seeing friends and family and people that I know devastated by the harm that violence causes in our community, I wanted to make a difference in the change. And it was not about me, it was about us, because I realized that a lot of the people weren't talking to each other. So there is, hence the ROC Against Gun Violence Coalition started. We collaborated with, and we still meet to this day with an array of partners, from the police to ATF to college, U of R, RIT, Boots on the Ground, Rise Up Rochester, Rock the Pieces, Pathways of Peace, et cetera, are all at this table to work collectively in eradicating gun violence. And what we found out, Gino, and I'll pause to let other questions and captains chime in, is that we found that there really wasn't a lot of conversation collectively happening on a regular basis to meet the needs of the victims and those most impacted in these communities. And I'll say this last. One of the things that we realized in the ROC Against Gun Violence Coalition, only 10% of the streets cause 90% of the violence in this community. And when we get into the trace report, we'll see the 7 zip codes are typically represented. And it's the same crescent, it's the same area that we've been talking about for 50 years, right? So that's very important that we understand that this is a concentrated problem in Rochester.
Yeah, I want to talk about the gun trace the data that came out earlier this month. So the city has partnered with Brady. They're a gun policy advocacy group. They're down in D.C. And, the interesting trend that I saw in it is that, a plurality of the guns are still coming from out of state, from states with kind of lax gun laws, Florida, Georgia, Ohio. But an increasing number has been coming from New York State. And that's interesting to me of like, okay, there's a trend happening here, but, what does that actually say? So I want to open up to that question of kind of the bigger picture of it. Why is it important for us to know where exactly the guns are coming from, especially if they're coming from a place like Ohio that has, all you have to do is have a pulse to go in there and buy a handgun, essentially. If we know that, and we know that trend is happening, that a lot of them are coming from out of state, there's not really much we can do about it, right? There's not a ton we can do to stem the flow.
No, I disagree. I totally disagree with that. I think there's a lot that we can do about it. If the data matters, we look at our RPD portal. It tells you a lot of information, but then there's a lot of information that's missing. This information with this data is evidence. And supply and crime to guns and tracking these time to crime guns is very, very important. 66% came from out of the state for dealers, Georgia, Ohio, Florida alone. When the first gun trace data report came out in 2023, that showed there were some from Pennsylvania, there were some from New Jersey. Those have now been and then some of those guns were even used at killing officers in those same areas, those same gun dealers, who are now shut down. The gun trace in New York dealers rose from 22% in 2022 to 32% in 2025. 62% of New York State guns came from Monroe County dealers. This is speaking to your point and why I disagree. So we know who these, as a barbershop person, for years, people come in the shop and say, the guns are coming from the corner stores. The guns are coming from this. Everyone's giving these examples of where they think these guns. So I wanted to answer that question. Where are these guns actually coming from? They're like cars. They have Social Security. They have they all have identification. So we ought to be able to trace this and find out. And what we found out before we had to redact the first and second report because of the T-Hart Amendment, we found out exactly what gun dealers these guns are coming from. And to your point, to my point of the disagreement with that particular point is that if we start holding these gun dealers accountable, the bad ones, most of them are doing a great job. Majority of them is only like 3% that are causing these problems, but they're making up the majority of the crime guns in these 7 zip codes. We have to hold them accountable.
Captain, anything to add there?
Yes, I mean one of the things that is it's interesting for us, because there's not gun dealers in the city of Rochester, so there's none that fall under our jurisdiction. But at the same time, knowing where some of these guns are coming from and working with our partners agencies, because obviously we have task force officers with ATF, and ATF has been a phenomenal partner to us in working with them and targeting, because the other aspect of it is our offenders, our worst gun offenders, they don't just commit gun crimes in the city of Rochester. They're going and getting the guns from somewhere. They're going and yes, it is sometimes from the corner stores. And yes, there's a big, what this report misses, and unfortunately I don't know how you would track it, is that there is an underground market. And so, the initial big box store might be the initial, but when that gun's stolen, that gun then passes hands multiple times, and that's not reported. That's not in that underground market. And unfortunately, we do have quite a bit of violence associated with gun transactions going wrong, right? Somebody illegally possessing a handgun, selling it to somebody else that illegally possess that handgun, and none of that is tracked. That's impossible to track that. But knowing where those guns are coming from, knowing where that pipeline is coming from, to work with our partners, it was weird on the report a few years ago when it popped up that a gun from, it's like 5 guns from the same pawn shop in Georgia or somewhere down south, it was used in a multitude of crimes here in Rochester. So it's how does that get here? And that's where working with those partners, working on that intelligence side of things, and then also tracking our offenders. Okay, if somebody we know that's a known shooter keeps making trips to Georgia, what are they doing? Right? Or keeps making trips to some of these spots that pop up to help kind of piece some of our investigations together. So it's great information to have, and it's great to work with our partners and to hold some of them accountable, especially when known offenders or known guys involved in group violence, that sort of thing, are in Georgia or in Ohio or in some of those places. And okay, what are they up to, and what are they tracking back here as well?
Well, is it easier to track the straw purchases, like a person that, I know a guy in Georgia who can buy it for me and then I can come and pick it up, or someone who's local that can, I know a guy who's got a permit, he'll go buy a pistol and he'll hand it over to me. Is that easier to track? Because there at least it's some level of paper trail. I know a lot are stolen, but a lot
right, a lot are stolen, and then not a ton are on permits, and that's where some of these other states come in. Where New York is pretty stringent in terms of purchasing, especially a handgun, going on a permit and it being tied to you. So that's kind of a tough one, and that's where again some of these other states where things aren't as simple, or things are way more simple than it is here, and you could argue multiple different ways on the Second Amendment, but at the end of the day, these guns are ending up being used here in violence, and that's where, as law enforcement, we got to continue to do our work to stem that flow. I mean, we've already got, I believe, over 250 crime guns this year alone that have been recovered by RPD. We're not even halfway through the year, which is phenomenal. And then, you go in outside of this report as well. The report mentions a bit ghost guns are become more and more of a problem. The first report when it came out, we talked a lot about Polymer 80.
We
who I
did.
believe is out of business.
Yeah. Yes.
There was a company from out of state, I want to say Arizona, somewhere out that way, that made a business out of selling 80% finished handguns. And they would send you the handgun. It'd come with a mold, drill here, put a pin in there, and now you've got a 100% handgun that's unserialized. And that company's been shut down. New York State's got some laws that have been on the books the last few years, some newer laws regarding ghost guns. But at the same time now, they're being replaced by 3D printed guns. We're running into more and more 3D printed guns and 3D printed parts, things like the switches to turn guns fully automatic that attach to the back of Glocks. Those are becoming more and more common. We've got 8 of them already this year. So it turns a Glock or a handgun, not just Glocks, but these striker fired handguns, turns them into fully automatic guns and machine guns. And those are incredibly dangerous. And so especially on a privately manufactured firearm, on a 3D printed gun with a 3D printed switch, that's asking for a lot of problems.
And also not exactly difficult to do. If you got a 3D printer and you got a schematic, you can get it done.
Right.
Yeah.
And incredibly difficult to police too. I mean, how can you actually stop people from if you can't ban 3D printers yet? So what exactly can you do to stop? And I don't know if they made up a significant portion of the total gun traces right now, but there's more.
What we could advocate for, though, is supporting laws requiring 3D printer safety firmware. So there's something you can do there to kind of not allow certain firmware to be sold. And we know we can never, like with the trafficking, there's always going to be that black market type of thing going on. That's going to happen in almost anything that's of value, right? And so we're never going to necessarily totally eradicate that underground stuff that's going on. Hopefully, that we could when we're catching individuals that are involved in those types of crime, the police are doing that type of work, that they can, then when they can discover, some of these big organizations that are doing this kind of stuff. But I do think there are some laws, some things that we can do to help to kind of hold people accountable. The Brady's Gun Dealer Code of Conduct could be helpful, and the coalition asked all of our county supervisors to send that letter to gun dealers in their communities, because again, Rochester has no licensed gun dealers within its city limits. So we know we were dealing with suburban gun dealers, and we asked all of them to adhere to the Brady's Gun Dealer Code of Conduct. We can strengthen oversight of high-risk dealers. We continue to analyze and publish this data, because this data is part of a picture. Data matters. And I think that's something that it helps us to use various tools in the toolbox to support law enforcement. But I'm always careful too when people try to, one person doesn't do this. One entity doesn't do this. Right? The coalition is made up, and the community of a lot of people. So in my opinion, to see these numbers going down and the trending that we're having, even though one shooting is one homicide, one shooting too many, and hopefully we can get to a place where we have 0, but we know that that's maybe not something that is really possible in the world that we live in, unfortunately. But we are striving to get to that point. But what we realize is that this community has made a decision that they don't want this happening in our community. So we support law enforcement. We're supporting our local elected officials. We're supporting collectively the work of the individuals from boots on the ground to academia, et cetera, to work collaboratively and collectively to educate and advocate around not only gun violence, but violence in our community. And so I really want to say hats off to all of those people who names never get told. They're never on TV. They're never on the radio show. They're never, in front of a camera. But they're doing this work every day, tirelessly, because this is tiresome work. And they don't, and they don't oftentimes get mentioned because people, say, hey, well, we did it. It's because of us, or because, and I say it's a collective, collaborative effort among this community. Rochester says we're better than that.
I do want to talk a bit about the Second Amendment argument here. And I know this is kind of very big picture on all of this, but when we're talking about what's happening here, and we're looking at these trace data reports, and we know that a very large portion of these guns are coming from states where you don't need a permit to buy a handgun, where the handgun normally isn't tracked very well, where, as in comparison to New York, where we have pretty strict gun laws. And then there's two arguments you can make. I think that very pro Second Amendment people will say, well, these gun laws don't do anything to prevent shootings from happening. While more gun control oriented people would say, well, they're only happening because other states don't have these laws. So it's a tricky thing. And I was just wondering what your guys' thoughts are on what policy you think could change on a federal or state level that could actually have a meaningful effect on how many illegal guns are ending up on the street.
All right, so my role is not policy legislative. That's not the
That's
police
fair,
department.
that's fair.
Right? And at the end of the day, whether the gun is legally owned or illegally owned, responsible gun ownership is the primary concern for us.
Amen.
And so getting into, different states and all of that, everybody has their different views. We enforce the laws that are on the books, but being responsible with your gun ownership is the number one thing. Keeping guns out of the hands of criminals. And we have criminals, and I think every state.
Yes.
If you've got a history of shooting people and convicted of shooting people, it's illegal for you to have a gun,
right.
no matter where you go. And so trying to, responsible gun owners, wherever you got that gun legally, making sure that you don't lose said gun. So people leaving guns in unlocked glove boxes, or people leaving guns in trunks, or people, variety of things, leaving them in bathrooms, leaving them. I mean, you should hear some of the stories. Wow. So, responsible gun ownership is huge. And then number two, if, getting to the root cause of crime, because not every violence incident is gun-based. And so, a gun makes it easy. But at the same time, there's root causes of crime, and it extends beyond the firearm itself. And so, we can target gun violence here in the city of Rochester, and we do. That's a big part. But at the same time, we have to get to those root causes and then again, back to responsible gun ownerships. Because far too often, we can look at the vast majority. If you trace back these guns, a lot of them are bought at big box stores. Somebody's not walking into, our parolee that shoots somebody,
Right.
Isn't walking into, Dick's or wherever and legally buying the gun and then going shooting somebody with it the next night. That's a rare thing. The guns are, the vast majority are in the underground market, the black market, whatever you want to call it. And so keeping those guns from there, keeping them in the legal gun owners' hands and keeping them out of that underground market from the corner stores that you mentioned, places along those lines, to where those guns are being used for nefarious action. And that's the big difference is, supporting those that legally own guns, and at the same time, enforcement on those that are not legally owning guns and are using those firearms for negative consequences.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I say, ditto to everything that was said. And I'll be clear and transparent. I am a licensed gun owner. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not against owning a gun. I think that you should have the right to be able to do that and bear arms, and you should have the right to do that safely and do it in a respectful, responsible way. However, I would say I would look further at just what the states are doing in cities and say, what about countries? Look at what some other countries haven't had homicides at all. I often hear the mayor, speak to that point. When we just released the second gun trace data report, he spoke to that, how he's a part of the city of mayors and council of mayors, and how they look at what's happening in these other countries and how these other countries don't have this American problem. They don't have this gun violence problem in some of these countries. So clearly there's some policy, there's something that's happening there that's in place that's not allowing people to feel that they have the ability to do that. So I think we have to look beyond just our local laws, and we have to look abroad at what's happening in these other countries. What are they doing to decrease or almost eliminate violence that's happening in their country?
So as we're kind of going through this process of trying to mitigate our shootings, to cut down our shootings. Greg, I remember talking to you probably about a year ago about some of the efforts that the city was having, and some of the cities that they were looking at. It's like kind of I don't know if models would be the right word, but some of the approaches that Boston, I think, was one of the big ones we were looking at the time. That Boston has an extremely low homicide rate. Actually, like I was kind of stunned how low it is, and I haven't checked the numbers for this year, but I don't think it's trended back up. So I think that was mentioned as one of the ones that were like you're looking at what they're doing there. But any other places that we're looking at right now is like, hey, something they're doing is working, and we need to be doing the same thing here.
Right. So we were talking, especially during when we participated in the public safety partnership.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other angle I wanted to talk about today was we talked earlier about some of our prevention methods, but another prevention method that we also have is holding people accountable. And so, for example, we started a non-fatal shooting unit in the last year or two, and our non-fatal shooting closure rate has gone from around 10% to, as of a month ago, we're almost 50% on non-fatal shootings. And so holding people accountable. If you want to fire a gun on our city streets, you're going to be held accountable for that. And so treating a lot of so it goes under a model of treating even non-fatal shootings similar to homicides in terms of the technician work that goes into it, so the investigative work. The district attorney's office has been a great partner bringing assistant DAs to the scene, because oftentimes somebody from the DA's office in plainclothes will get different cooperation in terms of witnesses and victims than we will. And so we've gone from the past of if non-fatal shooting victim, somebody shot in the leg, for example, doesn't want to cooperate, we'd close it out, victim uncooperative, and we'd move on. And instead now we're really looking at these, okay, we might not be able to charge the assault, but we're still going to investigate this shooting because shooting a gun on our streets is unacceptable. And so we're still catching suspects and charging them with weapons charges, reckless endangerment charges, other things that don't necessarily require that shooting victim to be cooperative on. And we've closed out a significant amount of shootings that way as well. And so, and then beyond that, we've had some issues in the past. There's been no secret in terms of some of our gun arrests and some of the prosecution here in New York, not prosecution, but some of the laws in terms of our suspects just getting out the next day and some things along those lines. And so we've been working with our federal partners at ATF, and so every gun arrest that we make now, we have a 24/7 on-call ATF agent, somebody from the task force that's available to, in real time, evaluate all of our gun cases. And there's a going through and evaluating what the best prosecution is. And so the U.S. Attorney's Office and the ATF have been great partners in terms of federal prosecution and some of our more violent offenders and some of our worst offenders. Taking the prosecution down that road. And so looking at each gun case as well individually of what the best prosecution is, what's the best outcome for everybody involved. And again, ATF and U.S. Attorney's Office, the Marshal Service, and tracking some of these guys down. Just great partnerships at the federal level as well.
Can I also, and thank you for bringing that up too, because and this is what I speak to, how the collective, when you have what the uniqueness of what Rochester has, of us all coming together and seeing how we can solve this issue and all the great things that come as a result of that, the many minds. In 2018, when we were also touting, we averaged 20 to 30 homicides around that time. We had an 89.9% arrest rate for homicides, but we had an extremely low arrest rate for shootings. The collective got together and said, hey, and at that time, Dr. Elheimer from RIT, others were on the coalition at the time, and we noticed a gap there that could possibly be filled. Let's start treating the shootings as with an investigatory, excuse my missing out that word, response, the same response that we do with homicides, because we're obviously doing a great job there. Almost 9 out of 10 homicides are being closed and people are being arrested. But on the shooting side, that wasn't happening. So what are we doing different? So one of the recommendations out of 2018-2019 Solution Action Plan from the ROC Against Gun Violence Coalition was to change that to treat the shootings like homicides with the same type of investigation or response, as well as many other recommendations. And then in 2023, we released another solution action plan. I think almost all of the solutions that we recommended collectively have all been implemented. And so this is when I say when the collective comes together to solve a problem, or I think in what we've seen here is that these things are working, and the police are doing their job, the community's trying to do their job with coming forward with more information quicker, more often. The city is doing a better job job of dealing with the victims, which is also leading to more information coming forward because they're getting more of a response from the city, and it's a comprehensive response and a consistent response, not just somebody because somebody's well known on the east side, they get all these people trying to help them, but then we have a homicide on the west side, nobody knows this person and they don't get that help. Now you have a collective, consistent, same response for every victim in this city, and that wasn't happening before. And I think, and I want to add that along with the suppression and the education and all of the things that the police department is doing collectively, these things are showing positive results.
Sorry, go ahead.
And on that, frankly, it's the work that our officers are out there doing.
Absolutely.
I mean, just in the last 5 or 10 minutes while you were talking, I got pictures of a gun sent to me because our tactical unit was out tracking a robbery suspect that ran from them. So they had a chase with a robbery suspect that threw a handgun. That's a dangerous situation. It is. A violent suspect just threw a gun while the officers were chasing him just in the last couple hours. And then also on that note, we just had our longer term cases, our homicide type cases. Just this morning, Dimir Bailey just pled guilty to the murder of Sandra Blanding last year over on Spencer Street. So, I mean, we're getting those good results, and that's our officers, our detectives putting that work in.
That's right.
I can sit here and say 257 crime guns so far this year as of this morning. Every one of those guns has some sort of danger, risk factor, story behind it that our officers are out there doing. And 258 because we just got another one this morning. But that takes work and that takes risk. We've had 4 or 5 officers shot in the past year.
Yes.
We just had an officer shot in March that was stepping out with a violent suspect. We had 3 officers shot in December as part of a domestic. We had the incident in June or July last summer where the homicide suspect and around just barely, right by the head of our captain, that video went around. We've had a lot of violence towards our officers as well, and they're continuing out there. Every officer's still showing up at the start of their shift and going out there and getting guns like they just did again this morning.
Yeah, and that's why I started with prayer, because I was like, we really pray for our officers and our first responders out there because they're really in harm's way, and we can't. While I was on city council as chair of public safety, I made sure, and I say this, because it's just the truth. We wanted to make sure that they had everything, every tool that they need to do their job, all the resources that they needed to do their job. And I tell you that the state has done a good job with providing the different programs that they have and the funding that they have in order to be able to do some of the work, as well as ATF with that new machine. What is the machine called again, Captain?
Oh, we have a NIBIN machine now.
2 of them now, right?
In our building.
Yes,
what does that do?
So NIBIN, it's a integrated ballistics network. So we can take a casing from a crime scene. We take that ballistic evidence, and we have the machine on site to scan that machine. Our technicians are trained in it and get it put right into the ATF network and tracking guns. And
it's a game changer.
Rather than waiting months at times for the lab to do it, we can do it same day. So for example, that gun we just collected this morning, within at some point today or tomorrow, that gun will be test fired. That casing will be taken to our NIBIN machine and entered into the federal database, and we'll start to match that gun up to potentially match that gun up to other crimes.
So if it was used in a shooting in South Carolina, you would know about it.
Correct. Or used at any of our other shootings. And so oftentimes, one of the ways on the intelligence side of things, I sit in, we have a group violence meeting with all of our partner agencies, I believe weekly, every other week. And part of that is going through, okay, we had this shots fired on, Jefferson Ave. And we can look at it and say, okay, we don't have any arrests, nobody was struck, but at the same time, okay, the shot fired on Jefferson Ave last week, that gun was also used for a shots fired on Roycroft the week before, on this street the week before that, and that other street the week before that. Okay, who do we know that is common to those areas? Who do we know? Yes. We can start building up in real time, not 6 months or a year later with, oh yeah, we're in trial now, and that gun was associated with this scene, that scene. So you start to really develop who's involved in disputes and what disputes are going on a much more real-time basis, where you can start taking action associated with it. And so knowing, this gun was also just used in Syracuse. Okay, great. What did we have in Syracuse 2 weeks ago? Or what did they have? And we could start to work with those other agencies as well.
We're going to take some calls, but before then, we're going to take our only break of the hour, and we'll be back, talk some more.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. Proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, focused on the news, issues, and trends that shape the lives of listeners in the Rochester and Finger Lakes regions. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
Versus putting it together later for trial. It's awesome.
All right, we are back. We're going to take a couple calls. First one is Jack in Greece.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Thank you for taking my call.
Of course.
I have a question. I have a comment and a question. And by the way, I really appreciate the conversation. Even though I live in the town of Greece, obviously I have 2 adult children who live in the city, and we try and attend as many concerts and plays and events as we can in the city. So, but my question, and I really appreciate the comments. Didn't catch everybody's name, but the representative from the police department. Early on in the conversation, there was a mention of perception versus reality. Good that the data is dropping. But my question for the group is, as in your conversations with other cities around the country, cities where people feel much, much safer, what does the data tell you? What is the environment? What is the communication setup that other cities have where people feel safer than they might hear, say, in Rochester or some other New York State city? And my other comment had to do with the comment about trying to stop gun flow. I probably feel as strongly as anybody on here about the Second Amendment and how it's being abused by whether it's gun dealers or whatever. But the reality is that's a national level issue. You should separate that, in my opinion, from what you're doing locally. You can advocate at the state level to try and get other states to stop what they're doing, to ship guns here. But you can't, there is no border. I can easily travel to any state in the union without crossing any border. Nobody's checking what I'm bringing back. So the reality, we have a Second Amendment. I don't agree with everything that's in there about anybody and everybody can get a gun. And you can have a gun that can be converted, like you said, to a machine gun, and you can't stop that. So that's my point. Thank you for taking the call.
Thank you. So I think Jack brings up an interesting point that I kind of touched on at the start of the hour is, yes, we do have this trend happening, but the perception of crime in the city, as we were talking before we went on the air, is some people are very dedicated to the idea that crime is much worse than it might be, or that the city is more unsafe than it really is. And I think some of it is very valid. I mean, when you think of the incidents that just happened over the past few days, you had a man stabbed to death outside of a bar, and a very tragic incident, another incident of a man having his hand chopped off, and another extremely violent incident that happened. And when these things are very rapidly spread around social media, they're plastered on the TV news, it's, yes, of course, we can make the very valid argument that violent crime is always going to happen. It always is happening. And we should be aware of it. But at the same time, if someone's only perception of what's happening in the city is being kind of shown these very violent incidents over and over and over and over, I don't think you can blame them for having the perception that it is getting worse or it is just completely untenable. So yeah, to Jack's point, I'd like to get your thoughts on that, of like the perception versus the reality of what's happening.
Yeah, so I'm a couple answers on that. Number one is, we've got to continue spreading our message. It's tough to come out and say, and I know that we're kind of talking that the reality of it, but we're not going to go out and celebrate violence reductions. Mm-hmm. Because it's still too much violence, right? So we're never going to celebrate that. We're never going to have a party and say, hey, only 49 people are shot halfway through the year, or almost halfway through the year, because that's 49 too many people shot. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I encourage people to do is educate themselves. So our social media platforms out there, whether it be X, Instagram, Facebook, you can just Google Rochester Police Department social media and you'll find our channels. Where we're out there showing what we're doing. And that's a lot of the community engagement that we're doing, some of the big arrests that we're doing, and getting that out there. Because unfortunately, a lot of times when you just look at the news, it attaches Rochester versus the entire region. Mm-hmm. So you can see a crime not laughed, unfortunately, but on one of the news channels, they're talking about a crime that occurred outside of the county, and the header is Rochester. It had nothing to do with the city of Rochester. It just gets associated because of the Rochester region. Number two is a lot of the local media around here, and this is true in other cities, but a lot of local media, that's what drives them is emergency response.
It's easy.
It's easy.
You get a press release, you can write it up in 15
drives the
minutes.
clicks. And oftentimes my press releases are verbatim. And I want to charge some of these news channels for stealing my writing because it's literally cut and paste. Right, exactly. And so there's that aspect of things of that. No matter where the crime occurs or where the car accidents and wrecks and big things are what dominate a lot of the news coverage around here, and that's unfortunate. It might piss some people off, but whatever. A reporter that left here years ago that I still maintain contact with. Within a year of being in their much bigger market, similar violence issue, came back and told me it was somebody I ran into at crime scenes all the time, always standing on the corner with the camera, live from the shooting scene. And this person told me that in their new market, which is similar level violence, that they'd only covered one shooting in the first 6 months they were there, because it was no, we're fully staffed, we have the ability to go out. Shootings happen unless it's something unique, something outside of the norm. Our headline is not shooting every day. Like, that's not news. And was so blessed and was so happy that they could go out and find other news to cover instead of just, lack of better terms, low-hanging fruit. That's easy to cover. And that person was thrilled to have moved on from this market. And, I can't begin to talk about the behind the scenes on the news or anything along those lines, but that's me, myself, I stopped looking at the news half the time because when I pull it up, it's always a breaking news of some crime incident. There's police cars on XYZ street. Oh, okay. Right? And that just gets splashed.
Before they even know what is happening. It's just the picture of the cop cars. And we'll keep you updated.
Yep, and it's a false call. But then you also not a headline of false call on, Jefferson Avenue.
Right. If you don't mind, I just would like to speak to that as well as the caller. First of all, thank you for that statement and the question and your point from the caller, because it is real, especially depending on who you're talking to. When you look at the gun trace data report, when you look at the data here in Rochester, and it's saying that 10% of the streets are causing 90% of the violence, seven of the zip codes are predominantly the ones impacted by the crime guns, then if you go talk to those people, their perception is very different. You come and talk to me like we have, Gino, and you asked me that question in the barbershop one time. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's safer? Do you feel safer? No. Even though I see more police officers, even though they're doing their jobs, but as a owner on Jefferson Avenue every day with a cash business, right? I'm telling you that I'm very careful how I conduct myself in that community, in that neighborhood, all right? So that's real for me, for what I see outside of my window on a daily basis. So depending on who you go talk to, especially if you're talking to somebody in those 7 zip codes who are experiencing this on a daily basis and they're not driving home away from it or not exposed to it as prevalent as some are, they may feel that even though the numbers are down, they may still feel that because they're the most impacted. And that impact has results that come with that. Now, part 2 of that is keeping the conversation, taking it away from local and making it more state and federal. I agree with that. And that's why the coalition is important, because we have an advocating arm where we're advocating for our local or our state representatives and our federal representatives to do their part, and helping to create legislation, policies, and things of that nature that could help to strengthen our accountability person. So I agree with that to hold, this just not just a local conversation. People are having this conversation. Leaders, law enforcement, clergy are having this conversation all over. I'm leaving to go to Atlanta next week with a Clergy for Safe Cities cohort who are pastors from all over the country and in Toronto who are working on how they eradicate this type of stuff in each one of our respective communities. So this is not just obviously a Rochester problem, but Rochester gratefully have been trending in the right area. And I think that that's commendable to our law enforcement, to our mayors, to the people that are working on this stuff on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I just want to comment on the media part of it too. I'm grateful I work at a place where we don't do that daily quick hit crime reporting. I did it early in my career. I don't really ever want to do it again. And that doesn't mean that I don't write about crime. I do. But it's usually you just have to take a tiny little bit of an extra step to contextualize it, or try to understand how does this actually, what makes this a story worth telling. And just because an incident is flashy, or the old idea of if it bleeds, it leads, doesn't mean it's necessarily news. It doesn't mean it's good, effective journalism. It just means that something's going to get clicks, so you do it. And then after you do it, you are creating this perception of what the world is that might lack some nuance. And I think most violent incidents are usually interpersonal. They usually stem from some kind of beef that two people have with each other. And but when you just put out shooting happened on Lyle Avenue or shooting happened on North Clinton Avenue with no other context, well, what does the average person think? If I go to the city, I'm going to get shot because it's randomly happening all the time, and a reasonable person knows that's not the case.
Until recently,
rarely
though, it was
random.
happening more in the suburbs. Until recently, it was happening more in the suburbs than it was in the city. By the numbers anyway. I'm sorry, Kat.
But very rarely is it random, and that's a thing to remember. And again, we're not going to say crime doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But it's very rarely random, especially the violent crimes such as shootings and stabbings. They're very rarely random.
Well, that's our time. Well, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thank
We'll
you.
definitely be talking more about this in the future because this is a never-ending issue.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.